Okay, rulers, settle down. Ruler School is brought to you by Odyssey Games, where you can go to get singles for all your Force of Will and other trading card games, as well as these amazing patrons. Special thanks to guest lecturer member Vite Ramen. Thank you for your support. Class is in session.
Hello, welcome back to the Tournament Report with yours truly, Paul Reisman, and today we are taking a look at the recent OGP that was hosted by Games and Geek Online for the month of June, and my gosh, this was a GP. This was something very interesting to me because not only did I get to obviously work with Jeremy on this video, but this is one of the largest GPs we had, I think we've ever had. 103 confirmed entries. There might be contention there, it might be 104, but last time I checked it was 103 confirmed people in the GP, which was amazing. And by the way, this is all online, so this is by and large one of the most successful events I have ever seen in the history of this game. But with all that being said, let's get into the ruler breakdown here. So as you can see, a wide majority of the field was violet, and that will convert into the top 8. You will see that here pretty shortly. And if you're wondering where you're going to be seeing all of this info, it's on the Ruler School TCG Facebook page. That's it right there. We already have 702 followers, but we'd love to have more. So check them out there on Facebook. Faria made up the second most of the entire field, and that was about 12.6%. Roughly about, I think it was something like 18 decks. And Violet was like 29 decks. It was absolutely huge. And then, of course, you have Feasting Mushtart, which was only representing about 8% of the decks, like 8 total. But all of that being said, this will convert really well, as you will see, as well as Almeria's Feasting, even though it's not going to convert nearly as well as the Feasting Mushtart list that we have here. We did get one piloted by Jalen Rojas a little bit later on here in the tournament. And then, of course, there were a bunch of other newer rulers that came out with this past set. So there were a few Wolfgangs, only about 4 Olivias, but one almost made it into the top 8, which is really cool. There was a Celesta list. It was on stream, and by the way, if you want to check those out, go to our YouTube channel and go down into our archives to see all of these decks being played. We had a couple of Brads, didn't get there, but outside of that, we had a bunch of other rulers, 1-ofs, 2-ofs, a couple of Ragnaroks, not a ton of other decks out there that really made an impact into the top 8, but we wanted to at least mention them, and then they were the largest demographic outside of Violet. So if you're interested in what those decks might be, we can get you the full breakdown, but for the most part, these are the decks we figured that you are all most interested in looking at. Oop, that is not what I want. So here we are. This is our top winner and his deck list. This is obviously a Feasting Mushtart list. And so what this deck is trying to do is it's trying to provide you with extra cards. It's trying to look at the entirety of your deck, hyper consistency with Feasting, and then of course you're playing the main win cons here in Melfi, Prisia, and the Lycian package. And so what Melfi does is it counts as a chant toward Lycian, so you're able to cheat out Lycian with its own effect relatively quickly, and then in combination with Prisia's Big Show, start playing spells for free, including things like your cancel or your board wipe here. Paul is playing an interesting build because we actually saw this in in another build. He's playing one Magnus Beast with 2 Never End. And Never End, at some point he can convert your entire graveyard, hand, and field into fairy tales to make it so that they all gain Eternal. And then he also gets a big boost. He's a flyer. He will be a 15/15 after that effect resolves, and everything will have Eternal, which is phenomenal. Outside of this, the deck also has the capability of playing things to burn your opponent for a little bit, and then it has 2 sets of cancels, and you can even go into a third with Farisia's Journey. In the sideboard, you're going to notice that there's the the Witch of the Fallen Kingdom, probably one of the best black cards to come out of this recent set, right alongside Necronomicon Barrier, although I did not see a lot of that in the meta this time around, but Fallen Angel was definitely there. Witch of the Fallen Kingdom. And then of course you're going to see Flames of the Outer World in the sideboard. This is a spicy tech to get rid of Violet, because Violet's defense is only 800 and you can't chase to Flame of the Outer World in case you're one of those newer folks who came into the game. This card was actually really spicy back in the day, and now we got it attached to Satan's Phantasmal Body. So even though you're not running like Wolfgang 1, for instance, you can still use Flame of the Outer World and get some really good plays off of that one card. Then, of course, you have your Morning Angels, your Addition Hate, your Lycian Guards to mess with your opponent a little bit. And then the rest of these cards are brand new. So out of our mini set, we had the new Lumia, which sucks up all of the damage that you took and gives it back to you in the form of life gain, which is really nice. And it's also attached to a burn spell, or a removal spell, I should say, which is a really easy way to get rid of your opponent's stuff for 1 black. In this build, you're playing about 5 stones that can get you into black, so that's relatively consistent to get off. You have a new Flute, which allows you to come in at quick cast speed, rest 1 of your rulers, and you have 2, so that's going to be really possible for you to do. And then 4 minus the number of cards in your hand, you draw that many cards. So if you have 2 cards in hand and you play this card, 4 minus 2, you draw 2 cards. Pretty simple there. But it's a really nice way of just getting a whole bunch of cards back into your hand, and especially if your opponent is discarding them, you know, through the use of like Curse of Ragnarok or Dark Alice's Smile, you can just gain all of those cards back by drawing more cards from your deck, which is really nice. Lightning Rod Mermaid, heck of a good card, especially with Magnus Beast here. Magnus Beast can get this from the deck and just stop your opponent from removing any of your stuff, because it's all going to go toward her and she gets barrier, so it's just going to fizzle out. And then of course one Witch of Quenched Fire to stop those pesky burn decks, which we did see. We saw a Welser Matchstick burn, which was pretty fun. But this is Paul Martinson's deck. Just gotta say, I'm glad it was a Paul who won, and we're going to move on to the next list after this. So this is Derek Magwaneza. Or I'm sorry, this is Joseph Cuevas. What the heck? What in the world? Hold on, guys. This is what happens when you... I tried to upload things in a relatively organized way, and Facebook said no to that. I got canceled. So, second place was Derek Magwaneza. Huge fan of the channel, so shoutouts to Derek. And this is your quintessential Violet list at this point. Now, the number of atoms that you might choose might differ. The number of Turbulence you play to lock your opponent out of playing spells the following turn, that might differ. Playing Firestorm in your main might differ, but there are some core cards that you are definitely going to want to have in your main. So the effect of Violet is you can pay 2 to draw a card, and then you can discard an atom. And when any of your atoms go to the graveyard, you get those effects if they were discarded off of a Violet that you have on the field. So that would be really good if we had multiples, so that we can draw more cards and discard more cards, right? So that's why we have Tiny Violet. Tiny Violet is essentially this deck's version of Guinevere, where you draw a card and then discard a card, and you just cycle through your deck. The other thing that's really nice about Tiny Violet is when you play it, you get some atoms back into your hand, so you get to recycle that stuff. The other thing you can do is try and make the effect of Violet cheaper, and the best way to do that is with Heart to Heart Talk. It's the bottom side of the new Mariabella card that came out of the mini set. This card is going to define and enable so many different decks in the current metagame, and who knows going into the future, what other activate abilities that we're going to have that get cheaper because of this particular card. All of that being said, I have no idea what this card does for Wanderer or Conqueror, I guess, the fan-made Conqueror format, because there are some pretty pricey effects out there. I think specifically of Vlad Tapish, the Black Ruler, who can, drain your opponent for a whole bunch of stuff, and just being able to just do a whole bunch of crazy stuff with heart-to-heart talk. Anyway, let's not get off track here. The other card you're going to want to be playing, this is one of your win conditions, is Atomic Bahamut. So to make this card cheaper, you can remove atoms from your graveyard, and then for every single atom that you remove with a different name, if you have up to 5 total removed with different names, he gains a whole bunch of different effects, which is including burning the board and getting a whole bunch of symbol skills. Definitely check this card out. This card is one of the defining cards in this current metagame, and is a huge, huge, huge threat, just like Bahamut should be. Now, the best way to getting your atoms back from the graveyard to your hand is through the Burning Robot. And the best way of getting your atoms back from the remove from game is through the Healing Robot. So that's why you have 1, sometimes 2 copies of one of these cards, typically not both. Sometimes you have 2 Healing Robots, sometimes you have 2 Burning Robots, sometimes you have 1 and 2 and 2 and 1. It just really depends on what you want to do. Atomic Turbulence is another one of the defining cards in Violet's package. If you discard 3, it effectively does a Law of Silence in your opponent where they can't play any spells on their turn, which is a really nice way of dumping all of your atoms into the graveyard for the effect of Bahamut, and then getting that really nice Law of Silence effect so they can't crack back and hurt you. Firestorm is usually played in the sideboard. Derek is playing 1 in the main, 1 in the side, and this is just to burn your opponent out. That was the easy stuff. That was the easy stuff. Now we have to talk about the atoms, because now the atoms are like really truly the place where you can flex and tech and do whatever you need to do. Probably mandatory 4-ofs in the deck are going to be the Eternal Wind to untap one of your stones, Everfrost to draw a card, so you draw a card and discard, and you can draw another card, so it's effectively like a 4C for 1, which is actually really good. And then you have Brave Force, which is probably another one of the win conditions in combination with Violet. So Brave Force gives you +6 attack, barrier, and I believe swiftness. I think those are the only symbol skills you gain off of this card. And that's a really good way of making your Violet bigger so she can swing in for game. She's one of your other win conditions that you just generally have in the deck. Now we can talk about some of the more necessary cards. Aegis is the white-red atom that we have here. This is one way of getting rid of your opponent's additions, so getting rid of their Lycians, that's really important. The red atom all the way on the right here is Gradius, which removes your opponent's effects off of their J-Ruler or their J-Resonator. That's really great, because we have no way of getting rid of Eternal in this game, which is probably why Celesta is going to struggle a little bit in this metagame, because Gradius does exist, and Violet, just seeing so many cards, might actually eventually get into one of these. You generally want to have at least 1 Void, which is this black atom at the very bottom here, to just get rid of your opponent's graveyard. That's really effective against Almeria's decks, so if they have Final Stance in graveyard, or other decks that heavily rely on the graveyard, which is a lot of them. And then the flex points are going to be your Prominence, your Dark Prominence. This is basically your Stoning to Death, or your general kill spell. On Violet's effect, this is a 1-drop kill anything on the board, which is really nice. Magical Loveliness is a way of just getting some additional burn into your opponent, which is relevant sometimes. I know there was one game that we were watching in the GP where burning with Magical Loveliness was actually very relevant. So this is a flex point, though. You don't necessarily need 3. You could have 2, you could have 1. It's really all up to you. And then one of the atoms that I'm still personally a little confused about why we play this. I think it's just to have another name, but White Garden just gains you 1,000 life, which is okay, and maybe it does something in the mirror match that I'm just not entirely aware of. I'm not entirely sure if this card is all that necessary, but it is an additional name for atoms that you have. And then your last atom, well, we've gone over all of them, right? Well, it's actually the stone. The stone is an atom. So you can sack this stone and draw a card, and it counts as an atom in your graveyard. For some of you not newer, but not older veteran players, you might remember Spirit Stone from way back in Alice Cluster, Rhea Cluster, being able to sack that stone and just draw a card was really, really, really helpful. It's even better in Violet. So yeah, the Atom Stone is really, really, really good. And then you're playing 4/6 Sage Stones, which might make this deck a little bit inaccessible for some of you players out there who did not get your 6 Sage Stones right off the bat. Getting your Violet able to use her effect multiple times and to untap her to be able to deactivate with, very few stones can sometimes be relevant. So all of that being said, 6H Stone, it's kind of mandatory in the deck as far as I can tell. And what's interesting about this ruler is she's skewing a little bit more red-blue, which is different. We haven't really seen a red ruler, generally speaking, who's gone into blue and been really effective. So outside of Milas Mujdart, I guess that would be the exception, right? But that's really more of a tag ruler situation. In the side deck, you have a lot of really similar things. Endless Purse to just draw a whole bunch of cards. Burning Robot to get more atoms back from your graveyard. Exorcist Mage to banish any of your opponent's Prisias that are coming in, because typically the win con is to go Prisia into Prisia into Prisia into Prisia into a Sigurd and then into an Institute to be able to boost all of those Prisias up. Surging Lightning, this card is very interesting to me. In sideboards, it's a random blow up anything on the field, non-targeting, which has relevance, especially in formats where you can't target certain rulers. Excuse me. Another Lightning Rod Mermaid, Lycan Guard, Healing Robot, Void, and then the Firestorm we talked about last time. So these are the general decks that you are going to be seeing in the top cut here. But in addition to that, and I'm going to just zoom us out here so I actually have a sense of where we are at. Please excuse me. Third place was another Violet list. Again, you can see in the just in the main board there is a little bit of flexibility. Sometimes people play 3-berry 4s, which is okay in my opinion. But sometimes you want to play 4. Fourth place was Thomas Graham, who won with Mujdar Featsing. What was interesting about this list is that he was actually playing the Dolly package and Magna's Guardian Beast as well. So the Dolly package gave him access to the board wipe that came with Olivia, which is really strong. And then everything else is pretty much exactly the same. That Spicy Valentina tech in the sideboard is super, super fun. Just steal all of your opponent's resonators. Super great. I have another Violet list. I made top 8. Like I said, this deck did really, really well. And then we had Jalen Rojas, who had the only Feasting Almeria's deck to get into the top 8. You're obviously seeing things like the Rhea package, being able to get Institute and with Sigurd, and the Final Stance. Playing Suyas is really good, and not only is it a way of getting rid of your opponent's stuff on board, it's a way of stealing cards out of their hand. Alongside the battle comes to an end, and then Ellipses. This card's super potent, very powerful, especially off of Lycan. Playing Lycan and then just saying, I'm going to name this card and get rid of it. That can win games all by itself sometimes, which is really, really, really spicy. So there's a lot of different engines coming into play in this Almerius list. One of the coolest things about this is it doesn't play a lot of the Witch with the pointy hat. There's only one in the sideboard, and I know people were freaking out about this card when it first got revealed. They said it's a new Lorite, it's going to be broken, but I think they underestimated, they didn't misunderestimate, they just underestimated how potent that card would be in the current metagame. And I would say in the early game, this card is pretty much dead. So playing one in the sideboard is pretty okay in my opinion. Of course, friend of the channel, Brendan Bremont, when he was playing this list on stream, he was playing it very tight, and of course, he's playing the deck in such a way that he's able to get rid of a bunch of stuff in his opponent's hand with things like, obviously, Curse of Ragnarok there attached to Suya, Dark Alice's Smile, and then he just ends the game with Sigurd, Institute, and the Prisia's Big Show. Duet of Darkness is a good way of getting rid of your opponent's board while also making them discard if you have enough different stones in your stone area. And then a couple of Fallen, Witch of the Fallen Kingdoms, just to make it a little bit more difficult for your opponent to play. Of course, we had Alberto Campos, who had the only Mujdart Almerius list, which I gotta say, it's a really good conversion rate. If there was only, I think there was only one in the entire setup that we had at the OGP, and I made it into 8th place. So good job for him for getting all the way up to 8th place. Sorry you were locked in a library for half a second there. He's playing some really interesting techs in this list. Of course, he's playing the Rhea package. He's not playing Lycian. So let's just keep that in mind. This is a little bit of a format gone by sort of deck. This is something you would see last format more or less. But he's also playing things like Witch in the Pointy Hat, Witch of the Fallen Kingdom, Necronomicon Barrier, a couple of Gradius, which is very, very sexy to see, because like this thing just removes so many relevant effects in the game currently. He's playing 3 of the Flute, of course, but then he's playing older techs. Things like Pierre, Exorcist Mage in the main board, Welser, and then of course he's playing the new anti-magic card, which cancels, which is really, really great for him. However, what we found on this is that because he's not running Lycian, the deck struggled just a little bit, and I think he was able to edge out a few decks enough to, obviously get into the 8th place. But at least in Jeremy and our opinion, there was no reason to not play Feasting in this list and be able to go into something like a Lycian package, unless he just didn't have the cards or didn't want to play the cards, which is totally fine as well. But we're also seeing Magic Stone Golem, which has not been a thing this in most of these other builds. So congratulations to Alberto. I'm glad you got out of the library, bro. And congratulations on placing really well with this deck. And I think that's it. I think we got everything. Oh my god, did we get every deck? We did. Cool. So now I get to talk about the spice. So this list made it onto stream, and it did not top, but it nearly did. And the reason I wanted to talk about this today is because I think Olivia, bias aside, might actually have a little bit of something to offer in this metagame as it continues to evolve. So what we're seeing is the ability for Olivia to pull out some really crazy stuff that would be random in any other deck. So obviously decks were maining things like Dolly, things like the board wipe spell, right? But what they weren't main decking, outside of obviously the Lycian package, were things like Passion, able to burn your opponent for 10 damage, really relevant. Obviously the 2-drop spell that just grabs things from your deck and plays them at instant speed. So things like the Shark that can just deal 10 damage to anything on the field or to your opponent, which is really nice. Also Sparklefish, basically a different Kaguya. Sparklefish is amazing. It can even recover all of your stones if you wanted to. So there are some things that this deck can get away with that other decks can't get away with because they need more dollies, or they need Olivia's ability on her front side or her back side to make it easier, to make things less random. And I think this deck actually has some explosive potential. And I just wanted to show off Joey's deck because I think there's something here. If we go into a new meta game with the ability to see, what decks can stand to a Mujdart, Feasting Mujdart. This deck has potential to do some interesting things against that list. However, the question that in my mind is, how well does this deck do against Violet? That's the only thing I don't know. Fun things can happen, potentially, right? But what's really interesting in this list is its ability to just blow up boards and just continue to blow up boards and do things at instant speed that no other deck can really do. This Olivia is pretty much everything Shayla ever wanted to be, and Shayla was, moderate in her own right. And I think this deck has something to offer as sort of a dark horse pick for the rest of the meta. Anyway, guys, those are all my thoughts on the recent GP, these recent lists. Make sure to head over to our Facebook and give us a follow. If you haven't already, hit subscribe down below so you get more content like this. And until next time, this is Paul signing out from the Tournament Report. Bye, guys.